the modern day diseases and symptoms that we see involve inflammation, which is secondary to a heightened immune response. And this definitely includes things like food reactivity, supplement reactivity, and environmental reactivity. Hey everyone, welcome back. This is Dr. Michael Ruscio. I am a practicing clinician, a clinical researcher, and an adjunct professor at the University of Bridgeport. And today let's discuss how an aspect or a center in your brain known as the amygdala, located in the medial temporal lobe, may hold a key to reducing fear, anxiousness, and also calming down your immune system and thus reducing reactivity to food, supplements, and the environment. And finally, and most compellingly, may help to reduce what's known as all-cause mortality. There's a few studies here I'd like to weave together for you to help you better understand a natural way in which you can favorably impact the amygdala and all the downstream effects, which include your immune system. The first study that really kicks us off appeared in Molecular Psychiatry in 2022, and they wanted to study how nature impacts amygdala activity. The design of this study was phenomenal, and sorry if I am overly excited, but it really was quite elegant. They started off by having participants fill out a questionnaire. How are you feeling? Then they put them in an fMRI, a functional magnetic resonance imaging study, and they had them look at faces making unsettling expressions and also do math equations, things to make people afraid. And many people are afraid of challenging math questions, or at least find them sort of stressful. So, baseline questionnaire. Then get into an fMRI, look at what's going on in the brain while exposed to stress. After that, half of the individuals go for a walk in nature, and the other half go for a walk in an urban environment. They go back in the fMRI, look at scary faces again, do a scary math problem again, and observe what's going on in the brain. Here's what they found. So before the walk, the gray area and the green area are representing the urban walk and the nature walk, respectively. And you see the bar graph here, which shows you the degree of activation of the amygdala. They're similar. Since these bars are overlapping, it tells us there's a similar degree of activation, as to be expected. However, look at what happens in the group that went on the nature walk. Remember, nature walk or urban walk, get back in the fMRI, exposure to the scary stimuli again, and there is a great reduction in the activation of the amygdala in the individuals who went for a walk in nature, as well as a heightened level of enjoyment and improved attention. So they had a better mood, better focus, and lower activation of the amygdala. And I'm going to tie that into your immune system here momentarily, but let's go to their conclusion first. We interpret this as evidence showing that nature is indeed able to restore individuals from stress. And remember, this stress includes not only the subjective feeling of being stressed, but also what's going on in the brain via fMRI and the activation of the amygdala. Okay, so let's continue. The amygdala, again, located in the medial temporal lobe of your brain, and importantly, as it fires down into the body, it affects stress, fear, sympathetic activation as compared to parasympathetic, so truly stressful, the stress arm of the autonomic nervous system. And it also impacts immune reactivity. And this is what I want to develop for you now. But all this together can impact fear, anxiousness, aggression, and food, supplement, and also environmental reactivity. But let's build this case. So in another study that we adopted the table from Barrett and colleagues, what you're seeing here, two groups of individuals, one for whom were stressed the other who were normal. Researchers took blood from all the subjects and then exposed them to, as you see here, PAM3 or LPS. Essentially, PAM3 is this synthetic N-terminal endotoxin. This will trigger toll-like receptor 1 and 2. And then LPS, you've probably heard this endotoxin. When you have leaky gut, you have exposure to LPS, and something similar as PAM3 can trigger your immune system, specifically toll-like receptor 4. But what they found was those who were not stressed, as you see with the teal bars, had a lower level of immune cell activation. And in those who were stressed, as you see clearly, there is a heightened level of immune cell reactivity to these bacterial cell wall fragments. So we're seeing here stress correlates with a higher and probably aberrant level of immune activation. Okay, let's continue. Let's tie that to the amygdala. In this next study from Brain Behavior and Immunology, they took a group whom were depressed and a group of healthy controls. They sampled their blood and they had them do, again, this fMRI. What they found is only in the group that was depressed, there was a higher activation of the immune system and a higher degree of amygdala activation, leading them to conclude, we found that higher levels of inflammatory biomarkers were associated with higher amygdala activation. Okay, so the center in the brain seems to correlate along with stress or depression and your immune system being hyperactive. And again, why this immune aspect matters so much is many of the modern day diseases and symptoms that we see involve inflammation, which is secondary to a heightened immune response. And this definitely includes things like food reactivity, supplement reactivity, and environmental reactivity. Okay, so that's great, Dr. Ruscio. What can we do about it, right? Show me the interventional data. Fair question. As we have discussed on the podcast before and actually had Asha Gupta on the podcast, this clinical trial essentially used this very specific meditation and mindfulness-based amygdala retraining protocol developed by Asha Gupta. It's not the only one. There's a few different versions of this out there. But in short, they were able to demonstrate a reduction in symptoms in fibromyalgia patients. They also found a favorable shift in BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is paradoxically elevated in fibromyalgia. And full disclosure, they actually were not able to demonstrate a reduction in inflammatory cytokines or a calming in the immune system. However, they were able to show people felt better via numerous subjective measures. So at least we're starting to see a partial improvement in this whole picture with a meditation and mindfulness-based intervention. Now, clinically, myself and the doctors in the office clearly see patients improve when they use this. So whatever degree or lack of degree is occurring with the immune cells specifically, the subjectives, I'm less fearful, I'm less reactive, I'm happier, I have more psychosocial flexibility, meaning I can go out to dinner and I'm not afraid of the food or that there might be mold. All of these things improve. So I consider this definitely a win. And if that doesn't satisfy you or compel you, let's look at this next data point. A meta-analysis from The Lancet, we found that increasing increments of residential greenness is significantly associated with reductions in all-cause mortality in longitudinal studies. The results of our study are consistent with previous systematic reviews and meta-analyses that had indicated a marked negative association between the amount of nearby green spaces and mortality and morbidity. This is something I discussed in Healthy Gut, Healthy You. We've discussed in the podcast many times in the past that living near green zones, green areas or blue zones, oceanic areas, is correlated with a reduced death from any cause, aka all-cause mortality. Now, we should also control for confounders. Maybe people who are of higher socioeconomic status live in these areas, and therefore this is a healthy user bias or a selection bias. And no, these have been controlled for via regression analyses in this systematic review, as has also been controlled for the impacts of exercise. So independent of socioeconomic status, independent of exercise status, the trend still holds that living near greenness reduces your chances of death from any cause. And perhaps what's happening is, as we showed in the first study, that time in nature reduces the activation of the amygdala and also has a corresponding impact that is anti-inflammatory, hence netting out to this favorable benefit as seen via the aggregate measure of all-cause mortality. Some of the data here still need to be further fleshed out in terms of more specific trials showing that something like time in nature will reduce inflammatory cytokines. However, if we look at the hard endpoint of all-cause mortality and the fact that time in nature is good for you, I don't think anyone would argue with that, and inexpensive and, of course, non-invasive, I think we can make a very important and compelling case to recommend that if you're not feeling well, if you're anxious, if you're fearful, if you're noticing a high degree of food reactivity or supplement reactivity or environmental reactivity, there are things to be done specifically for those factors, maybe interventions to improve gut health for food reactivity. But in parallel to that, mindset is extremely important. And one of the ways that you can improve your mindset subconsciously, if you will, is time in nature. Because remember, you can reduce that activation of the amygdala, which correlates with a overzealous activation of the immune system. So if you are not habitually spending time in nature, I would encourage you to do the best that you can because of the favorable impacts we see in the brain, in the immune system, and with all-cause mortality. Okay, this is Dr. Ruscio. Hope this helps, and I'll talk to you next time.